Hey friends, welcome to the Storybook channel. I'm Chantastic. Today, we're talking about two of my favorite tools, Storybook and Next.js, and how to integrate the two together. Now, I love both of these tools. They're absolutely amazing, and it kind of feels like I'm introducing two of my best friends together for the first time. Now, it's easy to get kind of nervous about introductions because things don't always go as planned. And integrating Storybook and Next.js is no different. As I was doing research for this, there's a handful of things that can be a little bit difficult or daunting at the beginning of this journey. And that's just because these two tools are totally awesome, but they don't really know about each other and how awesome the other is just yet. Things are getting very much better on that front, very much better. Things are getting better on that front. However, there are things that you need to know now if you want to be successful integrating the two today. And that's what we're going to focus on. I got 5 tips. All 5 might be valuable to you, maybe just one. But I'm confident, absolutely confident, that at least one of these will help you integrate Next.js and Storybook better and avoid some frustration along the way. So without any further chit chat, let's dive in. Tip number 1 is to use the Webpack 5 builder. Now, you might not know about builders in Storybook yet, and that's totally fine. You don't have to. All you really need to know is that there is a concept of a builder, and you can use different builders for different projects. Now, if you just run the sbinit command alone, it's going to use the Webpack 4 builder. However, Next.js 11 and later use Webpack 5 by default. So if you're on that version of Next, it's very possible that you're already using Webpack 5. Now, when we use the Webpack 5 builder in Storybook, we get the benefit of some additional integrations, ecosystem features, and improved performance. So it's really important if you're building a Next.js app 11 or later that you'll want to use the Webpack 5 builder. I want to show you how to do that using the initializer, the sbinit command for a new Storybook repo, but I'll also show you a link where you can learn how to transition a Storybook that's already been built with Webpack 4 into a Webpack 5 builder Storybook. So let's dive into the code. Let's open up a terminal over here. And here we're just going to run the command sb. Actually, I almost typed npm, and that's not what we want to do. We want to type npx sbinit. Now, if you're not familiar with this npx thing, all it does is it allows you to run this command, this initializer, without having to install it first. So you don't have to keep wonder if you have the latest up-to-date version for this command that you run very infrequently. Now, if we run it just like this, we're going to get the default, which is the Webpack 4 builder. That's not what we want in this next app. We want to use --builder Webpack 5, all scrunched together like that. We hit enter, and this is going to take a little bit. So now's a good time to go to the bathroom, get some coffee, do whatever you need to do. For this video, we're going to fast forward it until we get to the end. But I still have one thing. One thing to note is that this command is designed to be run inside of an existing project. It's actually going to inspect some of the dependencies that you have to make the best decision for you and your Storybook. And it looks like we're done, actually. So I just kind of talked my way through the whole thing. All right, so we see this command that we can run. It just says yarn storybook. We can copy paste that if we want. If you're using npm, you'll need to use npm run storybook. Same script no matter what. So yarn storybook. It's going to take a second to build up all of our stories, and this initializer actually creates some default stories for you to get a sense of Storybook, how it's used, how you can, how it works with the file system, etc. And then it will open automatically into our favorite browser. So we can see all of the default stories that it initialized for us as examples. And that's that. So what do you have to do if you have an existing Storybook inside of a Next.js app, and you know it's on Webpack 4, but you want to upgrade it to Webpack 5. Well, we have this really terrific blog for you on the Storybook blog, written by none other than Michael Schillman, fantastic human. And he goes through all the things that you need to know to upgrade this in your app. So there's some full instructions in this just right here. Just follow those and you'll be on your way to using Webpack 5. Tip number 2 is to create stories for whole Next.js pages. One of the beautiful things about Next.js and Storybook coming together is that they both really double down on this component model. So Next.js uses components for pages and Storybook uses components for stories. And this works out really handily when we want to test full pages. Now, there's this misconception that Storybook is really just for documenting, design systems, component libraries, small reusable components, etc. But that's just not true. If you have a page that's a component, well, we can test that too. So let's build a story for our Next.js page, our default homepage that comes with the app. So when we generated our Next.js app, we have this pages directory with a single page inside of it, our index.js. It is a component. It exports default home and has all of these various imports, including a handful of CSS modules that it uses. We can test this whole thing in Storybook. So let's do that now. We're going to go into our stories directory where all of our stories are now and create a new file. Let's put this in a subfolder of pages. And let's call this one home.stories.jsx. Okay. Now we're going to do a handful of things. First, we need to import our story or import our component page. So we'll do that first. Import home from, go out of the pages directory, out of the stories directory. So 2 of those into the pages directory and grab that index component. Okay, next we need to export default some metadata about these stories. So first the title will be, let's put pages home. Now, if we have this before this slash here, that's going to create a new little twirl down option for us that will have pages, and then we'll have our home stories nested inside of that. And the component that we want to use is home. Now let's create our first story. So we'll do export. Let's just call this, well, we can't use default. So export home page. And render our home component. One last thing, I got to put a const here, save that, and we see it pop up in our sidebar. Just got hot module reloaded right into place. So let's check it out. Let's see what we did. Well, it looks like something went wrong, so I'm going to refresh that, and it works. So I don't know why that happened, but we did have to refresh. So if you come up to this and you're like, wait, I know the right path. What the heck's going on? Just hit refresh. It'll work. Now, this is pretty cool. We have a story for this whole page. That's awesome. It looks a little bit odd, though. So that brings us to our next tip, tip number 3. Tip number 3 is to load global style sheets into the .storybook/preview.js file. I'm going to tell you why. So when I was first starting out with Storybook, I had a handful of global styles and I would just import them from story to story. So anything that needed the global styles, I would just import them in the story. And that's a terrible way to do it. It's a huge waste of time and a huge waste of just, typing. So I learned a better way to do that, and it comes in really handy here. So we notice in this story that this is not how this kind of generated Next.js page is supposed to look. We have some broken styles, and then the typeface is all wrong. Now, this is a really good example because I know that in all of the apps that I've worked in, there's been some kind of reset or, font family setting that happens inside of a global style sheet. So how do we add that to Storybook so that all of our stories get the benefit of this style sheet? Well, it's actually pretty easy. There's a directory that was created for us when we ran SB init, and that's the .storybook directory. It has two files by default, main.js, which has a lot of our configuration, and then a preview.js, which controls the canvas for all of our stories. Now, this is where we want to load our style sheet so that every story gets the benefit of this one global style sheet. And it's actually super easy to do. We can use a JavaScript import for this. So import, we need to find our styles directory. Let's close our stories real quick. So it's at the root styles globals.css. So back out styles globals.css. Save that. And it doesn't hot module reload, but if we refresh, it does. We have all of the new styles. We can see that it's looking exactly like that next demo is supposed to work, which is fantastic. I love this. Now, if this doesn't work right after a refresh, I would suggest restarting your process for Storybook. And that looks like this. We hit Control C. That will stop the process that's happening in our terminal, and we'll run yarn Storybook again. Obviously it worked already without having to do that, but if you get stuck and it's not looking the way that it should, that's a good place to start. Anytime you touch config, you should probably Control C. All right, so this is looking good, right? Perfect. Maybe not. So we have this image we have to deal with, which is going to be our next tip. Tip number 4 is to de-optimize next image in Storybook. Now that is a little bit of a head scratcher. That's a lot to say. So let's dive in. This one is one of my favorites because it actually comes from the community. Jonas Schumacher has a really awesome post on exactly how to do this and why. Now we're just going to kind of steal what they're doing. Right about here. It's somewhere in the middle of the post. We're going to just steal this whole thing, but let's talk about why we need to do this. First, Next.js has this really amazing image component. It's a real marvel of engineering, and it's designed to make sure that a user doesn't have to spend any extra bits or time waiting for the wrong poorly optimized image. It's going to go behind the scenes and it's going to figure out the device type and the capabilities and the size and make sure that an image is tailor-made for that one user's experience. It's very cool. However, Storybook doesn't know all of those internals of next image and the optimizations there. So we, being just writing stories about these things, don't necessarily care about having that finely tuned kind of device specific image. So we can just unoptimize the whole thing, but it does take a little bit of finagling. So let's look at this code and what it does. First, we're going to put it into our .storybook/preview.js. Remember, that's the one that controls all the canvas and stories that we're going to see. We import all of next image from next/image. We then create a local variable for original next image from the next image default export. And then we do this really cool fancy thing where we're going to use object.define property to define the default of next image and then just kind of replace it with this unoptimized version of the component. Super handy, super clever, and let's just copy and paste that now. Now, note that I am going to include a link to this article in the description below. So if you want to read more, there's tons of really great information in here. You can absolutely do that. So let's close this up and go into our config, again, storybook/preview.js. And we'll just paste this whole thing in here. So we already looked at it, so we don't need to do that. And then let's just go over to our browser. Let's hit refresh, see what happens. Nothing there. Now that's fine. We touched configuration, so we probably need to Control C and restart Yarn Storybook, see how that works. Takes a second. Okay, cool. We got that. Still doesn't work. So there's one more thing that we need to do. we need to tell our Storybook command in our package.json how to or where to serve public files from. So our next public directory is in our root public, and that's where this vercel.svg image is found. How do we do this in our package.json? So let's go over to our package.json, go over here, find our Storybook commands. We have a Storybook command that was generated for us, a build Storybook command also generated with us, and we can provide a public directory. So let's see, what does this look like? -s, and then we provide a path to our public directory, and we're going to do this for both. The API is subtly different whether we are kind of just building Storybook locally or building it for deployment. So that's why we have two different things here. I will also post a really handy article on the Storybook CLI options in the description down below. So let's save this. Now this time we definitely need to restart our server because this is at the script level. So we'll run yarn storybook again. Wait for a hot second. Jump back over to our browser and see that that image loaded. We did it. Thank you so much to Jonas Schumacher for this post. Totally awesome and very helpful. I have seen so many issues about people trying to figure this out, and this is the best way that I've found. So go check out that post. It's amazing. Really great. Lesson number 5 is to mock data for getServerSideProps and getStaticProps using mock service worker, or MSW. Now, before we dive into this at all, I need to make it very clear the difference between a tip and a recommendation. This is a tip and not a recommendation. The recommendation for providing data to components in all cases is to use args. Args are really great, and they give you a handful of things too. So I have made a change to our component where it now accepts a name prop. And if the name prop is present, it's going to put the name in the title here. Now, using args, we can actually do some really cool stuff. So if I hit A, we get this panel right here, and args integrates with Storybook in such a way that now it's going to present to me this control where I can change some of this data just on the fly. Now that is exclusive to args, the recommended way to provide data to components. However, I'm going to show you another way that may be interesting to you if you're doing a lot with getServerSideProps or getStaticProps. Again, not a recommendation, but I did think it would be interesting to cover this in case you want to also kind of like test the whole stack. Now, I'm not going to talk about what getServerSideProps are. I think that you probably understand that if you're watching this video. So let's dive into the implementation of getting them working with Storybook loaders and MSW. Let's get into it. So one of the things that this just basic Next app has is a demo for API pages. So those get served as JSON from API, and hello is the one that gets sent. It has name John Doe. Now, what I've done in this component is I have created a use of getServerSideProps. It's going to hit that endpoint, turn it, get the JSON, and then return the props data, which then gets filled in for this component. The cool thing about this is that all of this happens pre-render, right? So instead of rendering the component without the name, going off and fetching the data, and then rendering the component again with the data, this all happens on the server side. So super cool. So getServerSideProps is going to pre-populate that with the data that it needs. Now I want to actually test this whole thing with this function, and I want to get the data beforehand. So I want to use this getServerSideProps function that we used, but I can't actually call, the local host server with this. So I need a way of mocking that data for this request. Enter MSW, or mock service worker. This is a really cool tool that allows you to mock endpoints pretty easily. So let's jump into the docs real quick here and into the installation. Installation is pretty quick. We're going to grab these yarn instructions because that's what we're using, and then jump over to our terminal, kill Storybook, yarn add msw dev. Now, while that does its thing, I'm going to jump to the next part in our instructions, which is integrate. Now, I know that we skipped over the define mocks thing. We're going to get back to it. Don't worry about that. We're going to integrate with the browser. And we have one command that we have to run. And before I talk about that, there is a really cool reference that talks about the varied frameworks and where you can find the public directory. Why is that important? Well, MSW needs to create a service worker file that's going to get loaded into the browser. Now, it has this really handy command where it's just going to generate that for you, but we need to provide the path to where it should generate that file. Now, for us, that's public. We've explored that before. So we can just copy and paste this command, delete that $sign there, npx msw init public save. It did its thing. We can go over to our code, inspect that inside of public, we have now a mock service worker.js file that says, please do not modify this file. There's no need to modify this file. Don't touch it. So that's in place. Now, one last thing that you'll need to know is that in our package JSON, you need to serve this public directory to your Storybook. And we do this in the Storybook and build Storybook commands. You got to do this. We have it set up for our images. However, if you don't have this in place already, you need to add it. Okay, so we installed MSW, we generated this public worker, and we are serving the public assets. Now, how do we integrate it into Storybook? Glad you asked. Let's open up our preview.js file. And at this point, we would go back here, define mocks, go to mocking a REST API, and there's a bunch of information in here for us. However, I'm going to save us a little bit of time, and I'm going to copy and paste an implementation that I have from before. I'm going to paste this right in here, and it does a handful of things. First and foremost, we import setup worker and the REST API for defining RESTful routes from MSW. We have this condition around the whole thing that just checks to make sure that this is not a node process, that it's a browser, because that's the only place that we want this to work. And then here we create a variable for worker. We call it setup worker. We use REST get to define an endpoint that we want to mock. In this case, it's localhost 3000 API hello. It's going to take a request, a response, and context. And from there, we just resolve the context JSON, and then we pass in an object. And then we call it start worker. Now, so it's about 6 lines. You can just copy and paste this from our example repo and you'll be good to go. So save that and jump back over to our terminal to start Storybook up again. Now, the first thing we need to do is make sure that this works. So how do we validate that? Once Storybook starts up again, we can open our DevTools, and we'll see right here at the very top of it, we have MSW mocking enabled. Looks like it's all set up. Congratulations, you did it. Now we need to go about integrating this into our story. This is the fun part. This is where it gets totally wacky. So hold on to your butts. Let's go back into our code and go into our story. So home.stories.jsx. Now I've changed this story up a little bit to use args. We're not going to talk about that, but that's how we're getting these controls. Again, this is the recommended way to do it. It's the fastest way, it is the most integrated way, and it's the least flaky. However, if you want to try it this other way and test getServerSideProps, then be my guest at your own discretion. So we're going to add to our import getServerSideProps. Now, at the end of the day, this is just an async function that fetches data from an endpoint. So we can import it, no problem. And then we're going to use a loader to actually call that function. Let me show you what that looks like. We take our story. We're going to add loaders to it. Loaders is an array. It can take as many loaders as we want. In our case, we will give it a single async function. We'll use a block so we can assign a variable for data, which will await getServerSideProps. Okay, following so far? Good. We're going to return that data but we're also going to return the props property on that, because props is a nested field inside of the return for getServerSideProps. So that's why we're doing that there. Now, this is going to call that everything's hunky-dory, I think. Let's go over here. And yes, we can see some activity over here that wasn't there before. We see that a 200 was provided for this API. So it's getting called. That's great. However, we're still using args. So let's see how we can change this up. We'll go in here and we will take a second argument and take loaded. And from that, we'll have the props and we'll take name off of that and provide it here, name. Hit save. And there we go, John Doe. Now this is really cool because all of this is being integrated to actually mock this request from getServerSideProps with some false data. So it's really cool that we're using the getServerSideProps function that we defined it in Next, but inside of loaders for this. Now, again, I want to say this is not recommended, but it is fun and it is interesting if you need to use getServerSideProps in your tests. So that's it. Those are my 5 critical tips for integrating Next.js and Storybook together so that you can test both your pages and your components. Super awesome. So excited that you made it all the way through to the end. And now I have a question for you. What are your 5 critical tips? I'm sure that you've been doing this for longer than I have. So I'm curious, what are the things that you think I should know? Let me know in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter @Chantastic. If you liked this video, please give us a like and let us know that you like this kind of stuff coming from us. If you hated it, thumbs down, but please comment and let us know what you'd like to see instead. Finally, if there's other frameworks that you'd like to see this type of content for, then let us know that too in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications if you want more videos like this. Until next time, keep moving the web forward. Thanks, friends.